They told us we couldn't survive without them, not in a whisper, not in a passing comment. It was the official position. The Canadian economy is too small, too dependent, too close to America to ever really stand on its own. One trade dispute and we'd collapse. One phone call from Washington and we'd come running back. We heard it from their politicians, their ambassadors, their commentators, and then eventually from their president himself, 51st state. That wasn't a gaffe. That was a doctrine. And here's the thing, we didn't shout back. We didn't threaten. We didn't tear up treaties. We just kept going. Stable, predictable, boring. And now, Volkswagen just canceled their American factory, broke ground on a $7 billion plant in St. Thomas instead. German investment in the United States collapsed 45% in a single year. 59,000 American manufacturing jobs disappeared since April. Not relocated yet. Just gone. The companies aren't shutting down, they're moving north. They said we needed them. Turns out the world needed what we had all along. Let me take you back to January 2026. Volkswagen CEO Oliver Blume sat down with Handelsblatt, that's Germany's biggest business daily, and said something that should have been front page news in every Canadian paper. Quote, "With unchanged tariff burdens, large additional investment cannot be funded." That is not a politician spinning a narrative. That is a global CEO in public telling the world, building in America no longer makes financial sense. The Audi factory they'd been scouting in the US called off, not postponed, canceled. And here's the number that explains everything. In just 9 months of 2025, Volkswagen absorbed $2.5 billion in tariff-related losses, not over 10 years. 9 months. That's $280 million disappearing every single month, not into R&D, not into worker wages, not into new technology, just into chaos, administrative friction, border uncertainty. And it wasn't just the tariffs themselves. Modern automotive manufacturing, especially EVs, crosses borders 6, 7, sometimes 8 times before a single vehicle is finished. Each crossing another tariff, another delay, another cost that wasn't there 6 months ago. The math broke, and when the math breaks, capital moves. This is where the story gets bigger than one company. The German Economic Institute just released data that tells the whole thing in 2 lines. German investment in the United States, 2024, nearly 19 billion euros. 2025, 10.2 billion euros. That's not a slowdown, that's a 45% collapse in 1 year. And when those investments canceled in the US, they didn't disappear into a void. They didn't get returned to shareholders. They didn't get burned for heat. They moved. The question was simple. Where do you build when America becomes unpredictable? The answer was simpler. You build where things are stable. You build in Canada. I want you to imagine something. You sit on the capital allocation committee of a major European manufacturer. Your job is to decide where to spend billions of dollars over the next 20 years. You don't care about politics. You don't care about pride. You care about models. You run the forecasts. You analyze the risks. You look at labor costs, energy prices, logistics corridors, regulatory timelines. And here's what the United States looks like in 2025. Year 1, 10% tariff. Okay, you can model that. Month 6, tariff jumps to 25%. Adjust. Month 9, new tariffs on specific components. Supply chain explodes. Year 2, tariffs partially reduced, but only for some countries. Your competitors now have a completely different cost structure than you do. Year 3, the president threatens to exit USMCA entirely. If that happens, everything resets to zero. Economists call this an unknowable cost, and unknowable costs make 20-year investments mathematically impossible to justify. So what do? You never approved the American project in the first place. No announcement. No layoffs because nobody was ever hired. The jobs just never exist. Now look at Canada through the same lens. Same models, same forecasts, same 20-year horizon. What do you see? Regulatory consistency, trade agreements honored, energy prices stable, government incentives delivered as promised. Nothing exciting, nothing dramatic, just predictable. And in the world of billion-dollar industrial investments, predictable beats exciting every single time. That's not weakness, that's strategy. And it's paying off. Right now, as we speak, Volkswagen's PowerCo is building what will be one of the largest battery cell factories in the world. St. Thomas, Ontario, 1 million electric vehicles worth of capacity. PowerCo CEO Frank Blome said it directly. We're proud to position Canada at the forefront of innovative EV battery production. Canada at the forefront. Not because we shouted the loudest, because we showed up consistently. For years, but here's where it gets bigger. Between October 2021 and April 2024, automakers announced $46.1 billion in investments across the Canadian EV supply chain. That's not a projection. That's verified by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Honda, Volkswagen, GM, Ford, Stellantis. The Stellantis LG battery plant in Windsor is coming online this year. The GM cathode plant in Quebec is 2/3 complete. And it's not just the big names. Chemical processors are building plants nearby just to supply these factories. Component manufacturers are relocating. Logistics firms are expanding. Universities are aligning engineering programs with industry needs. This isn't a factory, it's an ecosystem. And ecosystems don't move back easily. Here's what that actually means for a person. Every $1 billion invested in advanced manufacturing doesn't just buy machines. It creates construction jobs that last years, not months. Engineering positions that pay six figures, logistics networks that need managing, service industries that spring up around industrial hubs, housing developments that get built because workers need places to live, university research programs that train the next generation. These aren't temporary jobs. These are careers. Mortgages getting paid in Windsor and St. Thomas, pension funds getting steady contributions, tax revenues funding Canadian schools and hospitals. This is what stability buys you. While Washington burned through political capital on trade wars, Canada was building physical capital, the kind that generates returns for generations. That's not luck. That's the reward for doing things the boring way. Now, here's the part that actually keeps me up at night. Not in a bad way, in a this is real way. Economists call it path dependency. Once a battery plant gets built in Ontario instead of Ohio, it doesn't just bring jobs. It brings gravity. Suppliers move in, not next year. Now. They sign leases, they hire local managers, they enroll their kids in local schools. Universities align their programs, not out of charity because industry demand is right there. Research funding follows. Workers relocate, not temporarily, permanently. They buy houses, they join community leagues, they become neighbors. And then something happens. That ecosystem becomes self-reinforcing. The suppliers who relocated to serve the battery plants, they're not moving back. Their supply chains are now here, their contracts are with Canadian facilities, their workers are Canadian. The engineers who took jobs here, they're building lives. Their partners found work, their kids made friends, they have a mortgage and a favorite coffee shop. The universities aligning programs with Canadian manufacturing, They're training the next generation for Canadian factories. Those students will graduate expecting to work here. Capital responds to track records. Not promises, and after years of policy chaos, global firms have reclassified the United States, not as a low-risk anchor market, as a high-risk variable. That reclassification takes years, maybe decades, of sustained stability to reverse. In the meantime, Canada consolidates. I want to go back to something. The 51st state line. People treated that as a joke, a throwaway. Just Trump being Trump, but it wasn't. It was a reveal. It revealed that the American assumption, the deep structural bipartisan assumption, was that Canada had no real sovereignty, that our existence was conditional, that we were, at best, a northern extension of their economy, tolerated until we became inconvenient. And that assumption shaped policy. It shaped the tariffs. It shaped the threats. It shaped the belief that we would always come back because we had nowhere else to go. But here's what that assumption missed. When someone tells you that you're not really independent, you don't argue. You don't plead. You don't send diplomats to clarify. You prove them wrong. And every single threat, every tariff, every insult, every dismissal gave Canadian leaders more political cover to invest in alternatives. Because the public finally understood. This isn't a negotiation. This is an existential question, and we need to build our own capacity. So we did. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows American manufacturing employment has declined by 59,000 jobs since April 2025. Those were supposed to be the jobs the tariffs would protect. That was the whole pitch. Bring manufacturing back, protect American workers, stop the outsourcing. Instead, those jobs aren't coming back to America. They're being created here, in Canadian facilities, paying Canadian workers, contributing to Canadian pension plans. The factories being built on Canadian soil today, they're the dividends of patience. And long after the political noise fades, long after the current administration, long after the current trade disputes, long after the current president, those factories will still be here, still producing, still employing, still generating wealth. Markets once lost, stay lost. Supply chains don't wait, and you don't get a second chance to be the stable option. Here's what I haven't said, and I want to be honest about it. This isn't a victory lap. We didn't beat anyone. We didn't win a trade war. We didn't out-negotiate or outmaneuver. We just stayed. We stayed consistent. We stayed boring. We stayed open. We stayed reliable. And the world noticed. But here's what I also haven't said. This is fragile. Not because Canada is doing anything wrong, but because stability is a comparative advantage. It only exists relative to instability elsewhere. If the United States stabilizes, if they ever return to predictable trade policy, consistent regulatory frameworks, reliable diplomatic behavior, some of this capital could flow back, not all of it. Ecosystems are sticky, but some. So the question isn't, did we win? The question is, can we stay boring long enough to make this permanent? Because that's the Canadian way, isn't it? Not the flashiest, not the loudest, just steady. And steady, it turns out, is worth more than $20 billion. They said we needed them to survive. They said we were too small, too dependent, too vulnerable. And maybe there was a time when that felt true. But something shifted. Not because we became aggressive. Not because we started a trade war. Not because we shouted louder than anyone else. We just kept doing what we've always done. Honored our agreements, maintained our institutions, stayed predictable. And when the world started looking for stability, real stability, not promised stability, they found us. Volkswagen found us. 7 billion German investors found us. 45% of their American investment redirected. The entire EV supply chain found us. 46 billion in announced investments. They didn't come here because we offered the biggest subsidies. They came here because we offered something rarer. Certainty. For the next 50 years, the infrastructure being built right now in St. Thomas, in Windsor, in Quebec, it will outlast every politician currently in office. The jobs being created will become careers. The careers will become communities. The communities will become the foundation of Canadian manufacturing for generations. This isn't a political victory. This is an economic foundation. And it was built the Canadian way, not by imitating the chaos around us, by staying true to who we are. I'm curious what you think. Is this the beginning of something permanent? Or can the relationship be rebuilt? What am I missing?